Formula One is headed to Spa. And it seems like we have quite some interesting stories that should keep us entertained. Apart from the fact that it's the sprint weekend, the weather is going to play a huge factor. And with the top teams bringing significant upgrades, who will come out on top? And how will Red Bull survive the first Hornerless weekend in their existence? The Belgian Grand Prix never tends to disappoint. A sprint race, a weather forecast that would put the drivers up to the maximum challenge, and changes on the grid for the first time in 20 years for certain teams. All of this is a recipe for a cinema-like race. But what should keep us entertained the most? Let's start with the weather, because it's a factor that always keeps things on the edge. Throughout the 3 days of racing, we are likely going to experience a solid amount of rain hitting the track at various parts of the day, making the sprint event and the setups even more difficult to adjust. And on a track that seems like Ferrari and Mercedes are going to bring upgrades to, it's always tricky to have rain. You can't really estimate the full power of what you've brought to the track. Yes, the stability should be fixed with the new rear suspension according to the tests that have been conducted in Mugello. However, Hamilton and Leclerc have not been clearly satisfied with the changes that have been made to that car. So it's something that would have to be answered in Spa. Ferrari have been chasing performance for a very long period of time now. And ever since Australia, they've seen that certain aspects of the car need to be worked on in a heavier manner, including the rear stability of the car. The first step was made in Austria by introducing the floor, and now in Spa, Ferrari will definitely receive the answer as to whether or not they should focus on 2026. On top of that, there's one segment that Ferrari needs to keep in Spa as well, and it's been bugging Hamilton a lot: the power steering system. The 7-time world champion admitted to hating it because it's very difficult to adjust. And in Belgium, this problem will only be deepened to a greater extent. Let's not forget that ever since he started his career back in 2007, Hamilton hasn't finished lower than P4 here at Spa. He racked up 5 wins as well. But Ferrari's performance in 2025 has always raised questions. Questions as to whether or not we should be expecting a masterpiece or a disaster class in the making. Right now, the latter one seems to be the more suitable expectation, especially after the weather forecast in Belgium, which could hinder the upgrades revolving around the rear suspension. Apart from the Maranello-based squad, we need to be looking at the developments made in Red Bull as well. It's the first weekend in which Christian Horner won't be the team principal of the team. Ever since the Austrian squad joined back in 2005, whether we like it or not, the internal affair has completely ravaged the inside structures of the team. And it's yet to be seen whether that would translate on track. Verstappen has finished on the podium in all of Spa's editions since 2020, showing how much this circuit suits him. However, the car he has in his hands right now might not be the best suitable one to continue his streak. And if that doesn't happen, we're likely going to hear some more talks about him going to Mercedes from 2026 onwards. The probability of this happening is more about 2027 than it is for 2026. But if the downfall of Red Bull continues in Spa as well, then the story of Verstappen leaving is going to deepen itself even more. Be that as it may, Red Bull is releasing upgrades for Max Verstappen in Spa.
The hope that the technical expertise of Watsche and Fallows has finally clicked, and we're going to see a more competitive version of the RB21. According to helmet Marco, and the championship fight in the Drivers' Championship is all but over, although a deficit of 69 points might be a bit too much to overcome. Speaking about the expectations in Spa, Marco went on to say, there are still 332 points up for grabs in the season, which is a substantial package. We hope that the updates we make in Spa and Budapest will be effective. On the one hand, there are more points to be gained, but on the other hand, 2 free practice sessions are cancelled, so we can't afford a disastrous Friday, after which we will have to try and get the car into the right tyre temperature window. Everything has to be right from the start. When asked whether these upgrades will bring Verstappen back in the championship fight, the response from the veteran Austrian was golden. You have to assume that. And despite everything that happened in Red Bull, you just can't help but admire the enthusiasm they have regarding the performance of the RB21. It's proven to be one of the worst managed cars ever, and at the end of the day, Verstappen is still somewhat considered a rival for both McLaren drivers, as admitted by Andrea Stella and Zak Brown. And I don't think we'll get enough of the Max Verstappen and Mercedes talks in the foreseeable future. Spa's results will definitely alter the story a bit more. But Russell has an opportunity to kick Max off the third place in the Drivers' Championship. The points difference is standing at 18 only, and therefore it could enable him to activate the exit clause. There will be a focus on the rivalry that these two have shown on track for a very long period of time. But now, the situation's viewed from a different aspect. It's a direct threat for the seat of George. Yes, there's an opportunity in which these two could be teammates, and Antonelli will find a permanent home in Alpine for a year or two. But I don't think that helps the big picture of Mercedes. It's either Russell or Max who will lead the team into the new era of the technical regulations. Mercedes is also bringing upgrades related to the performance of the car, but it's not really specified as to where they're going to end up with the W16 in Spa. However, it's worth noting that the weather should benefit them a lot, even if it's not raining. Colder tracks tend to be more favourable on the Silver Arrows Challenger because of certain overheating issues appearing with the tyres once the temperature ramps up. Of course, it would be yet another motivation and boost for Russell to prove that he's the next champion of Mercedes, and their investment hasn't gone in vain. But at the end of the day, it's not really up to us to judge anyway. Toto Wolff needs to make his own decision as to whether or not it's possible to keep Russell or move away from him, which I think would be one of the hardest decisions in his life, considering Mercedes has managed his entire career so far. The battle of the Woking-based squad is not one to be forgotten either. Just because they've been dominating up front doesn't mean we've entered into a monotonous season. Here, we have a 2016 type of vibe, when Mercedes protagonists were fighting for the Drivers' Championship, and I sincerely hope that Piastri and Norris will take it out to the next race. As of now, the momentum has shifted towards Lando after 2 consecutive wins, and it would be interesting to see whether he could make it 3 in a row and prove to McLaren that he's not the inferior driver that we believe he is. The media has kind of spun the story toward Piastri as the newcomer. Who's going to take the throne away from the head of Norris in McLaren? But that is a bit of a hard mission to accomplish. Despite Oscar being the leader in the Drivers' Championship, and let's not forget that the MCL 39 will be mounted with a new floor in Spa. And when talking about this to a greater extent, Andrea Stella said, "The next race in Belgium is a sprint event in which it'll be more difficult to introduce a new specification and make proper comparisons. We're actually pretty pleased with what we've seen during the free practice in Silverstone. All of the indications seem to lead us to introducing this new floor for the upcoming events." Yes, the crash in Canada raised some suspicions that clean racing between these two will be very hard to accomplish. But that's been debunked immediately in Silverstone and Austria. However, Stella and Brown are now aware of the challenge they have ahead of them. As long as Verstappen is not the threat, then the papaya rules might not even apply properly, as it's an every man for himself type of situation. Be that as it may, Spa holds some very interesting stories ahead of us, from the changes in Red Bull and Racing Bull's leadership, all the way to the upgrades of Ferrari and McLaren. We're about to receive an interesting racing weekend, in which certain teams will be looking to benefit a lot more than others because of this sprint event. The midfield battle shouldn't be forgotten either, and with Sauber's uprise, teams like Racing Bulls and Haas have been put under pressure. So, with all of this in mind, do you think that the Belgian Grand Prix is going to be an absolute masterpiece to watch? And more importantly, who do you see coming out of it as a winner, considering the rain factor and all of the news happening before the race itself? And once you do that, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.